It looks like Ilia Topuria's next fight might be against Paddy the Baddy Pimblett. At least that's where all signs are pointing right now. Originally, most fans expected Arman Tsarukyan to be next in line, since he's currently ranked among the top lightweights and stylistically presents the biggest challenge to Ilia. But that idea's off the table. Arman already has a fight booked against Dan Hooker. Another name that was floating around was Justin Gaethje, but that possibility seems to be fading away too. Gaethje's been openly frustrated with the UFC lately, even hinting at retirement, and his management team has accused the promotion of favoring Paddy Pimblett. Now, if you pay attention to what Ilia himself has been saying online, it really looks like his next title defense will be against Paddy. Of course, this is the UFC. Everything can change overnight. Maybe they'll switch gears last minute and go with Gaethje or someone else. But right now, all the chatter on social media points straight to Topuria versus Pimblett. Naturally, this matchup has stirred up a lot of debate. Many fans, and honestly, I'm one of them, feel this fight doesn't make much sense from a competitive standpoint. If you look strictly at the rankings, Paddy simply hasn't earned this shot. He's not faced elite opposition yet, and stylistically, he's nowhere near Ilia's level. But let's walk through how the division currently stands and see why the UFC might actually go this route. At lightweight, 155 pounds, the official rankings still show Islam Makhachev as number 1, though that's outdated since he's now fighting at a different weight class. So in reality, Arman Tsarukyan holds the top contender spot. By every metric, rankings, recent performances, and technical ability, Tsarukyan should be next. He's fast, well-rounded, and one of the few who could truly push Topuria to his limits. He wouldn't necessarily be the favorite, but he'd give Ilia a real test. But since Arman is already booked and Islam's moved up, that leaves the UFC in a weird position. Charles Oliveira just returned to the win column, but it's too soon to put him back in for a title shot, especially after losing to Topuria. Max Holloway isn't ready to return either. Justin Gaethje, the other logical choice, doesn't seem interested or mentally ready for another quick turnaround. And to be fair, the fan interest in that fight isn't huge either. So if we remove those names from the equation, who's left? That's right, Paddy Pimblett. Somehow he's next in line by process of elimination rather than merit. If you look at the rankings without Islam, the top 5 or 6 guys are all unavailable, leaving Paddy sitting there as the most marketable option. And that's the key word here, marketable. Because let's be honest, this isn't about who deserves it most, it's about who sells the most. And from a business perspective, Paddy versus Ilia makes perfect sense. You've got two polarizing personalities, Ilia, the cold, confident assassin from Spain, and Paddy, the brash, entertaining Brit with an army of fans behind him. Whether you love or hate them, you're going to watch. Still, from a sporting perspective, this matchup is almost absurd. Paddy hasn't faced top-level opponents yet. Let's take a quick look at his recent fights. His win against Jared Gordon was controversial. Pretty much everyone watching thought Gordon won. The judges gave it to Paddy, but it was a gift, no question. Then came fights against Tony Ferguson, Bobby Green, and Michael Chandler, all of whom were on losing streaks or clearly past their prime when they faced him. Paddy's opponents have been declining in quality rather than improving. Beating a half-retired Tony Ferguson with 8 losses in a row or a battle-worn Chandler doesn't make you a title contender. And that's exactly why so many people are criticizing the UFC's matchmaking here. It feels like they're ignoring their own rankings to chase a storyline and some extra pay-per-view buys. Now, don't get me wrong, as a content creator or a fight analyst, I'd love this matchup. It's the kind of fight that grabs headlines, drives views, and gets everyone talking. But from a competitive standpoint, it's nonsense. Still, the UFC isn't a sports league. It's an entertainment business. Their fighters aren't athletes in a traditional sense, they're contracted performers, and the company can match them however it wants. So, if you look at it that way, maybe this makes sense. Topuria is one of the UFC's hottest stars right now, and they want to maximize his visibility. If they throw him against another ranked veteran, it might not sell much. But if they put him in there with Paddy, the loudmouth fan favorite, they're guaranteed massive attention. And that's the reality of the sport today. Being the best fighter doesn't always get you the next big opportunity. Being the loudest, the most polarizing, or the one with the biggest following does.
Now, let's dig deeper into why so many fans are frustrated about this matchup. It's not that people dislike Paddy Pimblett personally. He's entertaining, charismatic, and undeniably good for the UFC brand. The problem is that, based on merit alone, he hasn't done nearly enough to justify a shot at Ilia Topuria. When you compare their resumes, the gap is massive. Topuria has already defeated high-level fighters like Alexander Volkanovski, Max Holloway, and Charles Oliveira, men who have held belts, defended them, and fought at the very top of the sport. Ilia hasn't just beaten them, he's made it look dominant. His precision, timing, and ability to mix power with composure are elite level. He's not just a brawler, he's a complete technician with knockout power in both hands. Paddy, on the other hand, has built his hype largely on personality and promotion. He's a crowd favorite, no question, but inside the cage, his performances have been inconsistent. He's flashy, unpredictable, but often leaves his chin exposed. His striking defense is sloppy, and while he's tough as nails, toughness alone doesn't win championships. Let's be honest, in most of his UFC fights, Paddy has absorbed more punches than he's landed. Against a striker as sharp as Topuria, that's a recipe for disaster. Ilia's timing is impeccable. He doesn't waste energy swinging wildly, he studies his opponents, finds openings, and detonates with precision. Paddy's wild exchanges might work against mid-level fighters, but against someone like Topuria, they're suicidal. Now, stylistically, some analysts have tried to make a case for Paddy. They argue that his size advantage, he's a naturally big lightweight cutting down from near welterweight dimensions, could give Ilia trouble. Pimblett's grappling is solid and his jiu-jitsu transitions are smooth. If he can survive the early storm and drag Topuria into deep waters, maybe he could create opportunities on the ground. But here's the problem. Getting the fight to the ground against Ilia isn't easy. Topuria's wrestling is underrated and his takedown defense is among the best in the division. Even if Paddy manages to pull guard or scramble, Ilia's cop control and balance make it nearly impossible to trap him in submissions. And unlike many brawlers, Topuria doesn't get reckless. He stays patient, picks his moments, and punishes every mistake. That's why logically, it's almost impossible to outline a clear path for Paddy to win unless it's a complete fluke. Maybe a surprise counter while Ilia's moving in, or an off night for the champion. But based on skills alone, it's one of the most one-sided title defenses imaginable. Still, what makes this fight fascinating isn't competitiveness, it's spectacle. Think about it. A fiery Spanish-Georgian champion versus a loud, comedic British underdog. The story writes itself. You've got national pride, trash talk, personality clashes, everything the UFC marketing machine loves. It's Conor McGregor versus Jose Aldo all over again, except this time the talent gap might be even wider. And speaking of McGregor, that's part of the reason this fight is happening. The UFC has been desperately searching for its next superstar, someone who can draw casual fans the way Conor once did. Paddy Pimblett fits that bill perfectly. He's controversial, marketable, and unpredictable. He makes headlines even when he's not fighting. Topuria, meanwhile, represents everything the hardcore fans love: discipline, precision, dominance. He's not a talker, he's a finisher. So when you put those two archetypes together, you get a fight that sells itself, even if it doesn't make sporting sense. From the UFC's business perspective, the timing also makes perfect sense. The company's new broadcast deal with Paramount kicks in around January, and they'll want to open that partnership with a huge event. What better way than to headline with one of their biggest rising stars, Topuria, defending his title against one of their most polarizing personalities, Pimblett. Whether fans love it or hate it, they'll tune in. Social media will explode, memes will flood the internet, and the fight will trend everywhere. In other words, it's perfect for business. Now, let's say this fight actually gets booked. How does it play out? Most likely, Ilia dominates early. He'll look to establish range with sharp boxing, punish Paddy for every wide swing, and maybe even finish him within the first 2 rounds. But if Paddy somehow survives that early onslaught, things could get interesting. As we've seen before, Topuria tends to fade slightly in the later rounds. Not dramatically, but enough for a big, pressure-heavy fighter like Paddy to capitalize if he's still standing. That's probably the only realistic scenario where Paddy has a chance. If he can make it ugly, drag it past round 3, and turn it into a chaotic scramble rather than a technical duel. But let's be real. Surviving 3 rounds of Ilia's power, precision, and pace is a monumental task. Paddy's chin might be sturdy, but everyone's chin has a limit.
Now, assuming the UFC actually locks in Ilia Topuria versus Paddy Pimblett, the conversation shifts from why it's happening to what it really means for the sport, and for both fighters' careers. Because beyond the spectacle, there's a deeper story here about what the UFC has become, a blend of elite martial arts and pure entertainment business. Let's start with Ilia. He's the golden boy right now, a champion with movie star charisma, a spotless record, and a reputation for finishing fights in devastating fashion. The UFC knows they have something special with him. Topuria brings the kind of energy that reminds fans of early Jose Aldo or even peak George St. Pierre, a fighter who's surgical, confident, and has that aura of inevitability when he walks into the octagon. Every time he fights, people expect a highlight reel knockout. But that's also the trap for Ilia. Once you reach that level of stardom, every fight needs to deliver. The UFC doesn't just want wins from you. They want moments, viral clips, and dominance. That's part of why a matchup with Paddy makes sense from a promotional standpoint. It's a fight where Ilia can look spectacular without taking massive risk. The UFC gets an explosive main event, Ilia gets another statement win. But for Paddy, this is a completely different story. This could either be the biggest opportunity of his life or the end of his hype train. If he somehow pulls off a miracle and beats Topuria, his career skyrockets overnight. We're talking superstardom, sponsorships, and massive paydays. But if he loses, especially in brutal fashion, the narrative flips. He becomes another overhyped fighter who couldn't hang with the elite. And the odds aren't in his favor. The reality is, Paddy's entire fighting style plays directly into Ilia's strengths. He keeps his hands low, moves forward in straight lines, and relies heavily on his toughness. That's suicide against someone as precise and explosive as Topuria. Ilia doesn't need to chase you. He lets you walk right into his power. Some people point out that Pimblett has excellent jiu-jitsu, and that his ground game could be his saving grace. But to use that, he needs to actually get Ilia down or survive long enough to drag the fight into grappling exchanges. Against a striker who controls distance as well as Topuria does, that's easier said than done. Ilia is not going to overcommit or shoot unnecessarily. He's going to pick him apart until the opportunity for the finish presents itself. Even if Paddy tries to pull guard or bait Ilia into scrambles, Topuria's dot control is suffocating. He doesn't leave openings. And if the fight stays standing, which it probably will, the speed, accuracy, and sheer power difference will be too much for Pimblett to handle. But here's the paradox. The UFC doesn't need this fight to be competitive to make it successful. They just need it to be loud. The press conferences will go viral. Paddy will talk non-stop, crack jokes, call Ilia names, and rile up the crowd. Ilia, calm and cold as ever, will sit there with that smirk, waiting for his chance to shut Paddy up inside the cage. It's the classic hero versus clown dynamic, and fans eat that up. In many ways, this fight symbolizes the current state of mixed martial arts. It's no longer just about rankings or pure skill. It's about attention. It's about who can generate the biggest buzz, who can fill arenas, who can make headlines. The best fighter doesn't always get the title shot. The one who sells does. Now, from a purely strategic standpoint, there's only one universe where Paddy could potentially pull off the upset, and that's if Ilia underestimates him. If Ilia comes in too relaxed, expecting an easy finish, and Paddy somehow capitalizes on a mistake, maybe he lands something wild. MMA is chaotic. We've seen bigger upsets before. But if both fighters show up prepared, disciplined, and sharp, this isn't close. Still, even with all that logic, there's a reason this fight has the entire MMA community buzzing. It's unpredictable in every sense, not because of the skill matchup, but because of what it represents. A win for Topuria would solidify his reign and prove that hype alone can't get you past greatness. A win for Paddy would flip the sport on its head and rewrite the lightweight division overnight. And timing-wise, everything lines up. The UFC's new era with Paramount begins early next year, and what better way to start than with a global spectacle? You've got Europe's biggest rising star versus Britain's loudest fighter. The marketing writes itself. The fight might not be competitive, but it'll be massive. So yes, it's frustrating for purists. It doesn't make sense from a ranking standpoint, but from a business perspective, it's perfect. The UFC has never pretended to be a league. It's an entertainment empire. And in entertainment, emotion always trumps logic. By the time this fight gets officially announced, likely sometime in late November or early December, the internet will already be split in half. Half of the fans will call it a joke, the other half will say, "Who cares? It's going to be fun." And that's exactly the reaction the UFC wants. Because at the end of the day, whether Paddy Pimblett has any real chance or not doesn't matter. What matters is that millions will tune in to find out. So tell me, if this actually gets signed, who do you have? The disciplined, ice-cold technician Ilia Topuria? Or the wild, fearless entertainer Paddy Pimblett? Either way, this fight is going to explode. Grab your popcorn. The circus is coming to town.